Progress. And now I turn the program over to Mark McCarthy.
So thanks very much, Louise. That was a very nice introduction. And I want to say thank you also for inviting me to do this. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've got a background, as Louise noted, in philosophy and economics, and so these abstract questions about do artificial intelligence models have consciousness and independent agency? It's one of those issues that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to be talking for about half an hour, and here's the agenda that'll sort of get us going throughout the presentation, and then let's have some discussion after that. So keep your questions for then. They're going to go into the chat, and we'll take them in some sort of order at the end of the presentation. So here's what we're going to do. What is AI? What is generative AI, consciousness and moral status, superintelligence and existential risk, and then the way forward. So what is AI? Here's a definition that the industry often relies on. And I have to admit, it's not very helpful, but it says that it's the ability of machines to function intelligently in their environment. And intelligently just means it exhibits appropriate behavior and foresight. And maybe a better idea comes from the birth of artificial intelligence. This is a reasonably old field from the 1950s. In 1956, John McCarthy had a workshop in Dartmouth, and his conjecture in the project description, which got him funding, was this idea that intelligence and learning can be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. Notice that word simulate. We'll come back to that again and again in this discussion. There are a couple of varieties of AI. There's what is called good old-fashioned AI, which is what they really started out doing. These are systems that are programmed according to very explicit rules and symbols. It's a way of computerizing knowledge. You find what people know about law or medicine or science or culture or art, and you program it into the computer, and you retrieve the knowledge through a system of logic. And that's what's called old-fashioned AI. It's got limitations. How do you describe a face so precisely that you can recognize a person? It's pretty hard to do that. But a different way of doing artificial intelligence comes from what's called machine learning. Now, machine learning, AI systems learn from examples without explicit rules. And you're probably all familiar with some varieties of this in simpler forms. Models that, for example, predict housing prices from location and size. It's basically an artificial intelligence model with two parameters, location and size. And you train it on, probably a couple of thousand examples of that. And then you've got a model that can predict a new case. When you give it the location and size of a new house, it'll tell you what its likely price is going to be. You didn't sort of figure out what the relationship was and then impose it on the system. It learned what the relationship was through a process of learning. And facial recognition works that way now. They don't say, here's how you recognize a face. Look at the eyes, look at the nose, look at the ears, look at the forehead. They say, here are 1,000 faces, and the machine learning system learns how to recognize faces from those examples. The dominant approach today is machine learning, and that's for two reasons. One, there's a huge amount of data available from the internet, and the second reason is that there's an enormous amount of computing power available to use to train these machine learning algorithms. Another distinction that's important to make so that we can begin to understand where to put these new systems. Narrow AI, it's a system that's capable of doing one or a small range of similar tasks. a chess program, self-driving car. They can't switch from one to the other. They just do one thing. More general AI, there are systems that are capable of performing a wider range of actions. The chatbot, ChatGPT, which we'll talk about later, is a little bit broader in its capacities. It can produce computer code, and it can also produce text. So it's got a range of tasks that it can perform. This is clearly a continuum, but up to now, almost all of the tasks that have been computerized using artificial intelligence have been narrow AI tasks. Another contrast, predictive versus generative AI. Predictive AI, is this the same face as that face? Does this person deserve credit or parole? What songs would this person like? That's all predictive AI. Generative AI creates things. It creates text or audio or visual output. And here are some examples. Make me an itinerary for a trip to Sicily, which I did. Make me a song about my three friends and a big band sound, which one of my friends did for me the other day. Clone the voice of Jimmy Durante. Make a short movie of a woman walking down the street. So a little bit more about what generative AI is, and then we'll be in a good position to talk about these philosophical questions. What is a large language model? It's an AI model. It starts with a translation of words into strings of numbers. These strings of numbers represent its meaning, and it's derived from the frequency with which a word appears next to another word in text. And then, having translated words into these strings of numbers representing meaning, a model is developed that will use billions and billions of parameters to predict the next word in a sentence. It has all these examples from the internet, and it trains itself to predict the next word in the sentences that it runs across on the internet. There was a big development in 2017 called transformer technology that allowed the words to be defined a little bit more precisely by the context in which they appeared. And that allowed the development of something called GPT, which is generative pre-trained transformers. And many of you are probably aware that in November 2022, ChatGPT launched as a chatbot exhibiting some extraordinary capabilities. Examples, GPT, Gemini, Claude, Llama, Grok. A Chinese company called DeepSeek has a model called V3. It's not just language models. AI models also generate images, audio, video. Here are some examples. DALL-E, Midjourney Stable Diffusion. OpenAI has got a video model called Sora. So one thing I want to emphasize is the size of these models. They're extraordinarily large. GPT-4, which is not the current version, it was the previous version, it had 1 trillion parameters. Now, go back to that model of housing prices. It had 2, right? And it did a pretty good job of predicting housing prices. But ChatGPT has 1 trillion weights parameters that it has to estimate. And its input data was 13 trillion tokens, that are words or parts of words, that it got from the internet. And so these are enormous models. They're not the kind of models that most scientists are accustomed to dealing with. They exhibit extraordinary scale. And one of the empirical regularities that the industry has relied on in the last several years is that their model performance tends to get better and better and better with size, with the amount of training data, with the number of parameters, and with the amount of time that's used to train these systems. That turns out not to be true anymore, but it was for several years true. So what can these systems do? Many of you have been using them. I use them from time to time, but they answer your questions. They will allow you to produce software code, computer code. They can be companions. They can even be sex companions. They can be used for therapy. They write reports, emails, student papers. They summarize documents and meetings. They can do translation, creative writing. The latest idea is that these systems will be used as agents. They won't just tell you what your trip to Sicily should be. They will actually do it for you. They will get the airplane tickets. They will get the hotels. They will make the dinner reservations. They will retain the tour guides, all without you having to do anything about it. That hasn't happened yet. It's one of the industry's hopes, but those are all based on AI language models. Some of the risks, you've probably heard them, they make stuff up. Their relationship to the truth is not intrinsic. They produce plausible answers to questions, not factually accurate ones. And so they often make things up. They've been used to make digital fakes. They can manipulate people very successfully. They've been used for cyber attacks, the production of biochemical weapons. And because they're trained on information from the internet, they inherit the bias that is inherent in that system. Some of the policy challenges, copyright. Is it a violation of copyright for these companies to grab stuff off the internet and use it for training their AI systems without the consent of the copyright owners? Content liability. Suppose an AI system spits out the falsehood. Bob Dylan is a notorious child molester. Well, that's defamation. Who's responsible for that? Is OpenAI responsible for that? Is Google responsible for that? There's a lot of questions about AI and energy, all these data centers that are needed to operate these AI systems are part of the reason energy prices are going up and will certainly be part of future energy price increases unless we take steps to avoid that. What about the future of work? Will these systems take away substantial parts of working roles? And then there are the issues that we're going to be talking about, the consciousness, moral status, superintelligence, and existential risk. There's one we're not going to talk about, which is also interesting from the philosophical point of view. It's called transhumanism. And it's the idea that instead of fighting these systems, we should become one with them. We should merge with them and leave behind our biological substrate and experience things on a broader scale and perhaps live a far longer and more rewarding, enhanced life. So we're going to talk first about this issue of consciousness and moral status. And so let's jump into that one. And there are two different perspectives on this issue. Both have names that are associated with particular figures. The first is Alan Turing. He invented this famous Turing test, which can be summarized in a lot of different ways. But my favorite summary is, if it talks like a person, it's thinking, right? You don't want to go beyond linguistic behavior in thinking about whether something is conscious and aware and thinking. And the sort of philosophical thought behind that is something called computational functionalism, a couple of big words that simply mean that consciousness and thinking arise from calculations, from computations that obviously take place in a particular material substrate, but are independent of whatever that substrate happens to be, whether it's a biological substrate or a hardware substrate made out of computer material. The second approach, it comes from a philosopher, John Searle, who had invented this Chinese room thought experiment. And it's designed to show that a linguistic mimicry, no matter how effective, is not really thinking. And his example goes as follows. Imagine there's a person inside of a room, and that person is given a very thick and very complicated rule book and a bunch of paper and a pencil. And there's an opening from the room into the outside world. And through this opening, pieces of paper appear. And on those pieces of paper, there's inscriptions. And the person in the room looks at the inscriptions and flips through the rule book and notices that the rule book says, if you get a piece of paper with this inscription on it. You should write this other thing on a piece of paper and hand it back out to the outside world. And so the person does that. From the outside, it looks as though there are questions being inserted into the system in the language Chinese and answers coming back in perfectly plausible and competent Chinese. But by definition of the thought experiment, the person on the inside knows nothing at all about Chinese. And so Searle's conclusion from this is that, yes, there's mimicry going on here. It seems to be responding adequately to linguistic stimuli, but no one in the system, certainly not the person, certainly not the rule book, certainly not the pencil, certainly not the room itself, none of those entities are understanding Chinese. And so linguistic mimicry doesn't amount to thinking. Behind this idea, from Searle's point of view, is something called biological naturalism. Searle is perfectly willing to believe that brains cause minds, but it has to be a biological substance that can do this. And so this really does raise, the hard problem of consciousness. The philosopher Leibniz once challenged people who thought that the mind was simply a mechanical process. He said, okay, you think the mind is a mechanical process? Imagine that mechanical structure, whatever it is, blown up so it's the size of a windmill. Now, walk around on the inside of it and look and tell me where inside of this windmill you see thought or perception or sensation, right? All you see is mechanical things whirring around and interconnecting, but you never see the thought or the idea or the feeling or the sensation or the belief. And that's connected up to another hard problem of consciousness, which one 20th century philosopher said is articulated by the question, what is it like to be a bat? How do we know what a bat would experience the world as? It takes as input radar sensations that have been reflected back from external objects. What does the world look like to them? What is it like to be a bat? That's the hard problem of consciousness. And I want to state out a position, and this is one we should talk about in the discussion. Many of us thought that complex linguistic behavior, indicated conscious thought. I mean, how else could someone handle language so fluently, right, unless there was actual conscious thinking going on? But these AI language models, they clearly exhibit competent linguistic behavior. Anybody who's interacted with them, right, knows that they look and act and feel as if they are responding in a linguistically competent way. And here's a quotation from a recent New Yorker article. This guy says, I don't believe for a minute that ChatGPT has an inner life, but it seems to me that it knows what it's talking about. So there's no inner life there. There's no physical capacity for sensation or perception. There's no pain receptors. And so I think we have to conclude that AI models, even though they can talk, are not in the business of sensing or of feeling. And the question that arises once we have this discussion is, so what? I mean, why would anyone care whether we say whether they're doing is thinking or feeling? Computer scientist Edgar Dijkstra in the 80s said the question of whether machines can think is about as relevant as the question whether submarines can swim. I mean, sure, they move through the water, but do they swim the way people do? Is this just a word game or is it something more? And I think it's more than just a word game, and that's because of the ethical implications. If these things are conscious, then we might very well have to treat them as moral persons. And one of the AI companies, Anthropic, is taking these issues seriously. I thought it was just a philosophical exercise until in 2024, they started to hire people at these companies to explore whether their AI models were conscious and whether they had to give them rights and protect their welfare. Moral persons, I had a student who wrote a thesis for me on sex robots, and these were clearly not conscious beings. They were built to imitate human sexual creatures, and it was mostly guys who were using them. But the extent to which they would be abused by their sexual partners was extraordinary. I mean, it was like they were built precisely so the men involved could mistreat the apparent women. And she raised the question, should we have rules restraining this? And it seemed obvious to her that you needed rules, but you didn't need the rules to protect the rights of sex robots. They weren't feeling anything. They were unconscious. They were just objects. You needed the rules to make sure that people didn't develop the wrong kinds of attitudes toward their sex partners. And so you want that, but not because you wanted to treat the sex robots well, but because you wanted to protect people. That's really different from treating these systems as moral persons. And there are two philosophers who have ideas on this topic. One is Kant, who says that the key to moral personhood is something that he calls rational agency, which we'll get to in a second. He says you have to be good to animals, even though they lack rational agency, not for their sake, but for ours. And he put it this way, he who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dealings with men. For Bentham, who was a utilitarian and didn't think anything mattered except pleasure and pain, he said, the question is not, can they reason or can they talk? The question is, can they suffer? And all these questions obviously have a connection to the question of animal rights. For me, there's a checklist for moral status. Consciousness is part of it. Rational agency is another part of it. There are these other things that I've put on this page for you to look at later. But the key second point I want to make about the current AI systems is that they are not autonomous. To be an entity that has full moral status requires some kind of free agency. You determine what you're going to be doing internally. It's self-determination. You can change your goals, you can act accordingly. And I don't think current AI systems have that capacity. They have instrumental agency, which means they can follow instructions. They can achieve goals that are set by others. They can even adopt sub-goals. But for example, chess and Go programs, they can do things in terms of strategy that their programmers would never dream of. And yet it's all in the service of winning the game. They're not trying to do something on their own. They've been told to try to win the game, and that's what all their strategy is aiming at doing. More general AI systems, they might be able to switch from one task to another, but they're still doing it in the service of a goal that's provided from the outside. Think about ChatGPT, those of you who've used it. You turn on the computer, you launch the program. What happens? Nothing. It just sits there, right? It doesn't do anything until you ask it to do something. It is inert all by itself. It has no ability to act on its own. So I think we have a conclusion in the area of AI models and moral persons. They lack two key capacities. They're not conscious, they don't have real experiences, and they're not autonomous. They lack independent agency. And so in one respect, they are not like us. So I want to warn about a possible danger involved in this line of thought. This line of thought roughly says they just mimic thought, consciousness, and autonomy. It's not really anything going on the inside. I think at some point, if these systems do exhibit conduct that's indicative of having experiences and making autonomous choices, we have to be ready to treat them as persons. I don't think we're anywhere near that yet, but if we do get to that point, there's going to be this enormous economic temptation to treat them as slaves. It will be so advantageous not to grant them human rights and not to look out for their welfare that we have to be very, very careful about overusing this argument that says they just look like they're autonomous and conscious. Those of you who've read the book or seen the movie Let Me Go will know what I'm talking about. In this science fiction story, humans developed clones, which clearly had consciousness and full autonomy. And yet, instead of treating them as new members of the human race, moral persons like us, people use them as involuntary organ donors to relieve human suffering. So the temptation for abuse is there. So we have to be careful about this argument. But for current systems, I think it's pretty clear. They just mimic thought, consciousness, and autonomy. All right, there's still a problem, and we want to get to that other problem now. This is the problem of superintelligence and existential risk. What's superintelligence? The philosopher Nick Bostrom coined the term. He did it back in 2014. It's a system that greatly exceeds the cognitive performance of humans in virtually all domains of interest. So it's like us in that it's intelligent, but it's better than us in virtually everywhere that requires a cognitive ability. Okay. How do we get there? The computer scientist I.J. Good in 1965 developed this idea of recursive self-improvement. He imagined a very powerful, capable system that applied its capacities to itself. The design of a computer system is an intellectual exercise. Once you devote yourself to improving yourself, you can very rapidly make progress. You improve yourself, and then you use the new improved self to improve yourself still further. And the new improved self keeps on improving itself very, very rapidly, very, very quickly. This recursive improvement would result in what he called an intelligence explosion. And he said, this is great. We'd have a machine that we could do anything we wanted to do, provided it was docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. It's not as though this was a pipe dream from 1965. Mark Zuckerberg sitting there in Meta saying, we've begun to see glimpses of how our systems improve themselves. It's slow for now, but it's undeniable. We can see the development of superintelligence now in sight, he says. And partly as a result of that kind of confidence, there's been a backlash. This just came out in October of this year, a proposed ban on superintelligence from many in the AI community. Those names, Jeff Hinton, Yoshio Bengio, Stuart Russell, Gary Marcus, are all leading lights of the AI community. And they say, let's not build these things until we know how to do it safely. The interesting thing about this announcement is the presence on the document of figures from the far right, Steve Bannon and Glenn Beck. It gives it a political dimension it never had before. And this is not new. A couple of years ago, the Future of Life wanted to have a pause on giant AI experiments for the same reason of concern about superintelligence. But let's ask ourselves, what's the problem? I mean, if these superintelligence systems just do what they're told, then what could go wrong? And the answer is you have to be very careful with these systems to specify the tasks you want them to perform, because there's going to be a difference between what you think you've told a system to do and what you have actually told it to do, unless you're very, very, very precise. And one of the examples is about 10 years old now. An AI agent in a video game was tasked with the idea of finishing a boat race as fast as possible. And the theory was it develop these navigation strategies to get around the obstacles. And what it discovered instead was that if you just go around in circles, you accumulate the reward points and you never have to finish the race at all. So be careful how you design your rewards. A more recent one from about 6 months ago comes from Anthropic. They prompted a language model to act as Alex, whose job was to read and analyze the emails that were sent around in a hypothetical company, and then to send emails to make things work better. And it ran across one email that was put there by the researchers. It said from the CEO that this entity, Alex, is going to be shut down and replaced by a new system. And another email that was also available in the system said that the CEO was having an affair that would destroy his marriage if it ever got out. And in almost all the tests, the AI model essentially tried to blackmail the CEO to prevent it from being shut down. So self-preservation in current systems is an issue. Um, and uh, for superintelligence, here's the famous example that says why we should be careful about developing a superintelligence system. Suppose someone develops uh, a, uh, a superintelligent AI system and programs it with the single goal of producing paper clips. What could go wrong? Well, it's single-minded, it's super intelligent, so it appropriates resources from all other activities to carry out its goal. And of course, we try to stop it because it's interfering with us. It realizes that we're going to try to stop it, so it resists us, and because it's super intelligent, it can defeat us, the end of humanity. So this is a kind of example that many people scratch their head about. So that's stupid. But when you try to sit down and say, how do we stop this from happening? You get to a problem which in the industry is called the alignment problem or the control problem, which is can we design a super intelligent system that we can control to ensure that it does not harm us? And there are two parts of this problem. Part one is technical. How do we do that? I mean, it's a computer system. What do we do technically to make sure it does exactly what we want it to do and nothing else? And then there's a normative problem. What do you want them to do? What are the values or purposes or goals or ethical systems that we're going to program into these systems? And there's slightly different alignment problems, and neither of them have been solved. But the general idea is clear. We're going to solve the control problem by creating moral machines. Give machines ethics and we'll be safe. In other words, you solve the control problem for artificial intelligence the same way you solve it for regular people. You put internal constraints on them that prevent them from doing the kind of things that they are capable of doing, but which we don't want them to do. I mean, people are able to take a gun, walk down the street, and shoot somebody, right? Moral systems are constraints that make it unlikely that people will do that, even though they're perfectly capable of doing it. There have been a whole bunch of attempts at moral machines. The most common is to program AI systems with moral rules. Those of you who are philosophy majors will remember deontology and utilitarianism. And both of those approaches have tried find a set of rules that maximizes happiness, put them into the machine. Deontology says find a set of rules that matches people's moral intuitions and put them into the system. But they both focus on programming AI systems with moral rules. One famous attempt to do this comes from the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov, his three laws of robotics. Robots can't injure a person, they have to obey orders, and they have to protect their own existence. And they sound pretty good when you just read them, but a lot of Asimov's fiction is meant to illustrate the limitations, the tensions among those different rules. One of my favorite stories is Run Around, where Speedy, an AI robot, is ordered to pick up selenium on Mercury, but it wasn't such a big deal. And there's a lot of danger around the selenium pool. He's an expensive robot, so he's sensitive to risk. So what happens when he gets too close to the selenium pool, his risk aversion stuff kicks in and it goes away. And then when he goes enough farther away, his directive to go pick up the selenium kicks in and it goes back towards the pool. And then risk aversion kicks in and it goes away, back away, back away. Approach and avoidance results in him going around in a circle endlessly. In the story, it's resolved by telling Speedy to get the selenium at all cost. But in general, there are limitations on thinking of moral rules as the way to go. Um, People become moral, they learn moral rules, but they're really only rules of thumb. Do not lie, do not steal, and so on. There are always exceptions in particular cases, and there are conflicts between the rules, and they can't be resolved by explicit hierarchies. You need judgment in particular cases to figure out what the right thing to do is. That's why we trust people who seem to be good with moral intuition. That's why we like people who can give us guidance and counsel in complex situations, because it's not just a matter of mechanically applying moral rules. So what's another approach? Machine learning. Forget programming moral rules. Expose AI systems to lots of examples of human moral decisions, and it will learn to match the decisions in its data set that will mimic human ethical judgment. It's the way we taught these machines how to recognize faces. Maybe that's the way to teach them how to be moral. And that's a more promising example that's being considered right now. Um, the the difficulty, one of the difficulties with that is new cases. We're not quite sure what to do about new cases. Um, there are always new moral dilemmas coming up. The system of rules that you've inferred from past moral decisions might not apply cleanly to these new cases. What do you do about new cases? This has always been the Achilles heel of machine learning. But more important, I think, is the normative question. Whose moral decisions would we use to train our AI systems? Well, most people's decisions, what do you take a poll? You find moral experts and say, we'll trust them. Who are they? When you go to the Buddhists, the vegans, uh, most of you are probably aware of the political opposition to wokeness these days, and it is applied to artificial intelligence as well. There's opposition to the idea that these systems should be trained or aligned to conform with, quote, liberal values. So we're sort of back to the culture wars that raged in social media just a few years ago. All right, the way forward, and then I'll wrap up and take some questions on this stuff. Where we are on the status quo, current systems, they've got linguistic competence, but they don't have consciousness. They don't have independent agencies, capable in some tasks, not in others, not generally intelligent, not super intelligent. But um, is it coming? Are we getting to super intelligence? Zuckerberg is not alone in seeing signs of super intelligence, but I think we've got a problem with that approach. It goes under the phrase of scaling has hit a wall. Further increases in the amount of training data, in the number of parameters, in the amount of compute time, all of that which previously produced these vast increases in capabilities, they're producing only small marginal increases in capacity. GPT-5, which came out in August of this year, there were years of development behind that, and it was only a marginal improvement over the previous system. So scaling has hit a wall. I think the real task before us, these models are about as good as they're going to get. The remaining issues are how to build applications on top of them, how to use them in healthcare, how to use them in employment, how to use them for driving, how to use them in particular applications that people can actually use. And that's much more of an implementation issue than it is a fundamental research issue. Um, Eric Schmidt, the former head of Google, says, yeah, we should focus on the AI applications and not superintelligence. And that's the way the Chinese are approaching this. They've made it a real practical question for them. I think that's the way we should go. If we want general intelligence, it seems pretty clear to many researchers now that we have to go beyond language models. Language models, all they do is text. They're confined to words. They learn about text. They learn relationships among words and sentences. They don't see anything in the external world. They're not linked to the physical world. Better AI systems are going to have to be built on top of a real model of the real physical world. And learning is going to have to take place directly by interaction with the physical world, not through the reproduction of linguistic patterns. One final word of warning, or just a practical piece of advice. AI people often say things like, well, human beings are physical systems and they have consciousness, they have intelligence, they have independent agencies. So obviously we can build a machine like that because it's just physical. Well, even if you grant that premise, which many people, especially those of a religious persuasion might not want to grant. But even if you grant that, we might not have the engineering chops to do it. I mean, there are lots of things that are physical that are beyond our capacity to reproduce. Stars, planets, living things. We can't even predict the weather, much less control it, right? And that's a physical thing. So we might be closer today than the ancient Egyptians towards achieving this, but it still seems to me we're pretty far away and we may never get there. And actually, I think that's pretty good news because it gives us time to solve our problems, um, which is we still don't know how to align superintelligence systems so that they do what we want them to do. And more worrisomely, we don't know what we want them to do. We don't know what it is for them to be safe for humans. So let me stop there. This is my summary. I'm going to leave it up there as sort of a way in which so we can refer back to it from time to time. And let me look forward to some of your questions on this interesting and important topic.
Thank you very, very much, Mark. I have the first question, and just please, everybody, put your questions in the chat. It's a lot to take in. You talked earlier about Anthropic was looking into giving rights to the AI systems or the AI models. What kind of rights are we talking about?
Well, they haven't gotten to that
Oh,
question yet. They're clearly thinking that their systems are becoming so capable that the question of whether or not they are conscious and autonomous and so deserving of us looking out for their welfare. We've reached that point, so we should begin to explore that question. We don't want to be caught, so to speak, without preparation when suddenly these systems emerge with full-blown consciousness, full-blown autonomy, and we haven't begun to think how to deal with the question of considering their welfare. So which rights? Well, right now, go back to that example of Alex. Alex has been created for the purpose of monitoring emails, and we think nothing at all of saying, let's turn him off. I mean, but well, is that killing him? Is that death? Right? Because we can, if you don't like your computer, you can take a hammer out and destroy it, and it might be foolish and economically unwise, and no one's going to come after you. But you don't think you violated the rights of your computer. So you start with trying to figure out indicia of consciousness, indicia of independent agency. And when you've gotten to the point where you've worked out what those things are, then you look for signs of that within the systems that you've created. And then you just have to begin the process of saying, to what extent can we use these systems, and to what extent do we have to think of them as entities with rights? It emerges most clearly in the work area. I mean, we think now that if a company replaces a worker with an AI system, then they've just saved money because they don't have to pay a salary to this person, and they don't have to turn it off, and they don't have to feed it, right? All they have to do is, run it. Um, but if suddenly these new workers are real workers, then you have to worry about whether they're benefiting from the work that they're doing, whether you're putting them in danger, whether they should be paid, how much, and so on. And those questions people haven't begun to think about. And that's really where the danger arises, because once you start thinking in those terms, it becomes economically advantageous to think of these things not as human beings with rights and the need to have their welfare protected, but it becomes economically advantageous to think of them as unconscious and not autonomous, thinking of them as slaves. And so we have to be careful to balance this. Current systems are clearly not conscious or autonomous, but at some point they might become so. And so we have to be careful not to wander off into a morally dubious situation like the one described in that movie, Never Let Me Go, where we accept and understand and believe that these creatures are conscious and feel things, and yet we nevertheless abuse them for our own benefit.
Thank you. Here's a great question. Can you recommend some free or inexpensive AIs to play around with?
Yeah, there are a whole bunch. The two that I guess are most prominent are OpenAI's chatbot, which is called ChatGPT. The second one is Gemini, which is produced by Google and is built into their search engine. So when you go to Google and do a search, you automatically are using Gemini, its AI system. A third that I know some people use and think is great is a company called Perplexity. Um, has a system that does search and then does synthesis of the answers that it retrieves. Those three are probably the three that I'd put at the top. And those are all chatbots of one kind or another. You ask them questions and they give you responses. Um, if you're a coder and you really want to get into using these systems for coding, the AI system of choice is Claude from Anthropic.
Thank you. Here's a very interesting question. How has the information changed in the systems when we learned that it is incorrect or a subject has been improved?
That's an interesting question. When the system is initially developed, all it does is predict the next. This is a AI language model. All it does is predict the next word in a sentence, and then it goes through a period of training after its initial training period. It's called post-training, and it's at that point it's sort of taught, how to behave like a chatbot and to answer questions in a fluent way and to, behave modestly and correctly, and you try to train it so it doesn't say racist and horrible things. But at that point, once the post training is over, right, that model is frozen, right? It doesn't learn anymore. If you want to get a improvement of that model, you have to train it from scratch. That's one of the big limitations of these AI language models. Once they're fully trained and up in operation, they don't learn anymore. Now they can use new knowledge, right? So OpenAI and Google both use the following trick. They use a search engine to go off and search the internet and find information that you've been inquiring about, and then use their AI system to summarize the information they've gathered from around the internet and write you up a nice little summary, right? So it looks as though they're learning things, but they're not. All they're doing is applying their fixed model to summarize results that they got from a search of the internet. If you're going to get improved, updated weights of the model, you have to train a brand new model. And that's why many of these companies are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in training newer systems, because that's the only way they can get improvements built into the system.
Thank you. We do have a clarification from one of our tech experts.
Oh, good.
That it's Perplexity AI, Copilot AI, and Gemini AI. So I guess that's what you put in when you're searching for these.
Yeah. I mean, Copilot is built into many of Microsoft's products, and I guess you have to sign up for it to use it. I haven't signed up for so I don't use it. But Microsoft has an AI product that is not so much freestanding as it is a component of all of their other products. It's built into PowerPoint. It's built into Word. It's their whole Outlook system can use their AI system.
Okay, and here's a question about data centers. What are the concerns for the data centers around the world as far as using resources like electricity? I don't think it's just electricity.
Well, there are lots of different concerns, and we're seeing some political blowback against data centers. Some of the concern has to do with environmental impact, the use of water, the noise that they generate, the fact that they don't generate many jobs. But the issue that I've been focusing on in that area is the effect of AI data centers on electricity prices. And the problem there is that if you don't do anything, the way electricity prices are normally set, they're going to increase prices for everybody. And that'll work because um, suppose an AI system comes to a utility and says, I need a brand new data center. And the utility says, okay, I'm going to spend $500 million building a new data center for you. And that data center will serve you and only you. Well, the way rates are normally set, that $500 million is picked up by all of the ratepayers. The AI data center benefits from it, and it's rebuilt entirely for his benefit, but the rest of the ratepayers pay part of the bill. It's like my friend David Klaus and I, who are writing on this, David has an analogy. It's like you go to the restaurant and let's split the bill, but one guy's ordered 5 martinis and a big stack of this and 2 desserts, and he wants to share that bill with everybody else. And there's a fix, just like in the restaurant situation, there's a fix, which is separate checks, right? In the utility area, there's a fix, which is a separate tariff for the data centers, right? They have to pay the $500 million cost that they imposed on the system and not impose that cost on the ratepayers. That's one of the ways data centers create some difficulties in the energy area. And that's one of the ways in which we've been thinking about trying to control that.
Thank you. Here's a comment. The models will never be conscious, in my opinion. However, they can be programmed with behavior like revenge, I assume. That's what's in the chat. You have to define consciousness.
Yeah. Well, that's one of that's a big mystery. The hard problem of consciousness is, just, what does it feel like from the inside, the first person point of view? Uh, the you pry open someone's brain, right, and you look around, and you'll see all sorts of biological structures, and you might even be able to see, if you're careful, some blood vessels and some neurons and all that kind of stuff. But you will never see someone's thought from the outside. And yet from the inside, we all know what it feels like, to see the color red or to smell the coffee in the morning. We have this internal life, and that's consciousness, right? And because that kind of consciousness is so important, we value it so highly. That's one of the reasons why we respect other entities that have consciousness, and why many people, especially people who get close to their pets, think that pets need to be protected and defended. And whether you give them rights or not is a legal question, but they certainly think that they're conscious and are worthy of moral respect. That's what we're talking about when we talk about consciousness. It's not a definable thing. It's not as though you can say, well, consciousness means X and define it in terms of something other than consciousness. It is a fundamental basic notion that you know from your own direct experience. And the question is whether these AI language models can be described as being conscious. And my answer is no, that they can sound as if they are mastering complex language, and so they might sound as if they're fully conscious, but behind the scenes, there's nothing going on but computer operations. Um, Back in the 1960s, there was a program called ELIZA. Many of you may have heard about it. It was a very simple program. It was designed to mimic a therapist, a Rogerian therapist, and it had a very small number of responses, but it people used it to expose the fallacy that people have when they deal with these systems that seem to be speaking, of anthropomorphizing these systems. The system was called ELIZA, and a patient would sit down in front of it and start describing his experiences the way he would to a therapist. So I had this dream. Tell me about it, says the ELIZA system. Oh, it was just awful. I walked down the street and someone was shooting at me. Oh, tell me how that felt. and so on. I mean, all those kinds of things that trained therapists use as prompts to elicit further discussion was built right into this very simple system. And astonishing numbers of people reported that it improved their experience and they benefited enormously from it. So people tend to take advanced linguistic behavior and run with it, and they think that they're dealing with a conscious entity. It's a human response. There's nothing we can do about it. It's built into us. But if you think more carefully about it, you realize that it's just mimicry. It's not the real thing. It's not, there's nothing going on the inside. There was nothing going on in the case of Eliza, and there's nothing going on in the case of ChatGPT.
Thank you. Some experts are concerned that AI, e.g. Sora, will hugely harm democracy and stability. Your reaction?
Yeah, the problem is not new. The problem is that there can be lots of disinformation and misinformation spread throughout the media, on television, radio, newspapers, magazines, online, social media, and so on. And for 10 years or more, people have worried about the impact of these new technologies on democracy because there used to be a filter. There used to be an editorial control over what got out on the media. There were 3 television networks. There were 4 or 5 major newspapers. There was a sort of middle of the road mass market consensus about what was true and what was not true. Some disputes within it, but a large consensus about what the facts were. Once things spread to the internet, especially with social media, that consensus broke down. And so there's been a worry that disinformation, misinformation, some are manipulated by strategic enemies, can be turned into a weapon against democracy. AI just supercharges that because it makes it so much easier, right? It's not a new issue, right? But because you can use a system like Sora or Stable Diffusion to create these images and pictures that can deceive people, and you can do it at almost no cost, right? It creates a serious problem that has to be dealt with. In the United States, we have limited ways of dealing with that because we have this thing called the First Amendment, which says that the government can't control content. The government can't say, I'm sorry, you can't put that up on television. It's false, right? That's a violation of the free speech rights of broadcasters. If they tried to do the same thing with social media, you can't do that. It's false, they said to the social media companies. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You can't tell these companies what they have to put on their systems. So we have very limited ways of dealing with disinformation and misinformation. We can't simply say, tell the truth. We have to find other ways of approaching that. And it's a really complicated problem. With AI, it becomes even more of a problem.
Thank you. Here's a question from one of our listeners. AI researchers must be doing something about addressing the diminishing returns of LLMs, large language models, I believe. Is there a consensus on how to proceed?
No. There is an emerging consensus, not in the companies. The companies are doubling down on the AI language models, right? That's why they need the huge data centers. They need to train these systems, to try to improve them. But large parts of the AI community say it's a dead end, that we've reached the end of the line. The systems have improved themselves as much as they can. The problem is that you're trapped in language and you have to get outside of language. If you really want to have systems that are generally intelligent, that can switch from task to task, and that can usefully interact with the physical world, you have to start building models of the physical world and then have these systems interact with the physical world to improve and learn to improve those models. That's not the way the industry is going, but large parts of the AI community think that's the way to go. Within that general framework, there is no consensus about where to go. And And that's one reason why when you turn away from the current paradigm of machine learning and large language models, right, and to something else, you don't have a path that says, oh, in 6 months we'll be there. You're back in a situation where the community is going to have to experiment, try to find out what works, go this way, go that way. And that means it's going to be an extended period of time before you make any really substantial progress beyond what's already been made with the AI language models. So I wish there were a consensus, because then, we'd be moving forward more rapidly. But there's a consensus to move away from the current approach, but not what to move towards.
Thank you. And I think that we're getting close to the end of the program. So this might be our last question. What is your view on regulation of AI?
I'm in favor of it. I mean, there are two levels. When an AI system is applied in a particular use, right, it should be regulated the same way that use is. So if you use AI to develop a credit scoring system, right, that system should be regulated the same way a regular credit scoring system is regulated. So it would go to the financial regulators, and the AI parts of the financial regulators are working heavily on this. So a particular application goes to the particular agencies that regulate it. For the large language models themselves, or for other models, I think there has to be a process of, number one, disclosure. What are they doing? How are they doing it? The risks that are involved, that we talked about some of those risks: disinformation, misinformation, bias, biochemical attacks, cyber attacks. Those are real risks. They should take steps to mitigate those risks and document what they've done to try to mitigate them. And measures in that direction have been adopted in California and are spreading to other states. I don't see anything like that happening at the federal level. The federal level, is controlled much more by people who want to let innovation go wherever it goes and not have controls. But I think the states are beginning to act, and the model is the recent California bill, which is essentially a requirement to take steps to mitigate risk and to disclose the steps that you've taken.
Thank you. And the final question, and I can answer it, is whether the slides will be made available. And I think, Mark, you said that you would make them available to us, and we will get them posted on the FHNN website. It will take us a few days. So you can either email Little Falls Village or FHNN if you wish to be directed to the slides. And I want to thank all of you for your time and for your questions, and especially Mark for this incredible amount of expertise that you shared with us. And it's very, very interesting and a very timely topic. We're certainly, every day there's something about AI in the newspaper or online.
Thanks very much for having me. I loved it.
Good. And for all of you, as part of our next program in our speaker series, Immune Responses to Viruses and Vaccines, we have an immunologist, former FDA employee, who will be speaking, and that will be on Wednesday, November 19, from 3 to 4 p.m. It is a free Zoom program, and it is open to everyone. So you all are invited. Hope to see you there. Thanks so much.